Madame Shade's pot of stew bubbled on the fire, thick and red with chunks of meat floating to the surface. She stirred it slowly, tears streaming down her eyes as she remembered her son's final moments. The customers would soon arrive, hungry for her famous meat stew, not knowing they were eating the flesh of her only child. This was the price of her greed, and soon it would destroy everything. Madame Shade wiped sweat from her forehead as she stood behind her food stand at Ojulegbo Market. Her small restaurant, or buka as locals called it, was just a wooden structure with a zinc roof and 3 plastic tables. But it had been her life for the past 15 years. Every day she served jollof rice, pounded yam and different soups, but business was not what it used to be. The other food sellers had newer shops, better locations and more customers. Shade watched as people walked past her buka to eat at Mama Beezy's place down the road. Her heart ached when she counted the money at the end of each day, barely enough to feed herself and her 13-year-old son, Deli. She needed to do something quickly or they would end up on the streets. One hot afternoon, while Shade was packing up her unsold food, her friend Bola came to visit. Bola leaned close and spoke in hushed tones about a powerful native doctor in Mushin who helped business people become rich. They say his medicine never fails, Bola whispered, glancing around nervously. Mama Joy, who sells clothes in Balagan Market, went to him last year. Now she has 3 shops. Shade couldn't sleep that night. She tossed and turned on her thin mattress, thinking about the native doctor. In the next room she could hear Deli's soft breathing. The boy was getting thinner and his school fees were already 3 months late. Something had to change. The next morning Shade made up her mind. She borrowed money from her savings group and took a Danfo bus to Mushin. The area was crowded and dirty, with gutters overflowing from the previous night's rain. She asked around quietly until someone pointed her to a narrow street behind the main market. At the end of the street stood a small house painted blood red. The sign outside read Baba Osun Spiritual Solutions. Her hands trembled as she knocked on the door. A small boy opened it and led her into a dark room filled with strange objects, skulls, feathers, and bottles containing things she didn't want to look at too closely. Baba Osun was nothing like Shade expected. Instead of an old man in traditional clothes, she found a middle-aged man wearing jeans and a t-shirt. His eyes, though, made her shiver. They were completely white with no pupils. He didn't ask why she had come. He just stared at her with those ghostly eyes and began to speak. You want money. Many customers. Success. His voice was deep and scratchy. But everything has a price, Shade. She hadn't told him her name. The spirits are hungry. They demand meat. Not cow, not goat, not chicken. They want human flesh in your pot. Every day someone must eat human meat from your hand. Then the money will flow. Shade felt sick to her stomach. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. How? She whispered. Where will I get? She couldn't finish the sentence. Baba Osun smiled, showing teeth filed to sharp points. He handed her a small black pot sealed with red cloth. Add this to your stew every morning. Go to the cemetery at midnight on Sunday. You will find what you need. But remember, the meat must be fresh. The spirits know the difference. He named his price. More money than she had ever seen. But he said she could pay after her business improved. Sunday came too quickly. Shade told Deli she had business at the market and left him sleeping. The cemetery was dark except for a few flickering candles on distant graves. Her heart pounded as she followed Baba Osun's instructions, sprinkling a powder he gave her around a fresh grave. Nothing happened for an hour. Then the ground began to move. A hand pushed through the dirt, followed by another. Shade screamed but couldn't run. The thing that crawled out wasn't fully human anymore. With shaking hands she collected what she needed in a black plastic bag. By morning her famous meat stew had a new secret ingredient. Within days people started talking about Madame Shade's food. The stew tastes different, they said. Better than before. More customers came each day. Market women who never noticed her before now sat at her tables. Even the local police officers made her buka their regular spot. The money came fast. Shade bought new pots, fixed her roof and paid Deli's school fees. She moved them from their one room to a proper flat. But at night she couldn't sleep. The faces of her customers haunted her. Sometimes she thought she saw the dead watching her cook, their empty eyes following her movements. A month passed. Every Sunday night Shade went to the cemetery. But things were getting harder. Security guards now patrolled the area. Other graves had been disturbed. She wasn't the only one doing this dark work. Once she had to hide for hours behind a tombstone when she heard voices approaching. During the day she jumped at every sound. When customers praised her food she felt sick. Deli noticed changes in his mother. "Mama, you look tired," he said one evening. "And you talk in your sleep now." She hugged him tight but couldn't meet his eyes. That night she dreamed of all the dead she had fed to her customers, sitting at her tables asking for more. One morning Shade found a dead black cat on her doorstep. Its body was arranged in a circle, head touching tail. Inside the circle was a message written in chalk. "The spirits are not satisfied." She knew it was from Baba Osen. That same day 3 of her regular customers fell sick with high fever. Baba Osen visited her that evening, his white eyes glowing in the dark kitchen. "The spirits want younger meat," he said. "Fresher. The dead have been dead too long." Shade understood what he meant, but she shook her head. "I can't," she whispered. "I won't." He smiled his sharp smile. "Then everything you've gained will turn to dust. And worse." The sickness spread. 10 customers now lay in the hospital. People started whispering about Shade's food. Her business began to drop again. Debt collectors who had given her loans came knocking. One morning she found Deli trying to give his new shoes to a beggar. "You work so hard, Mama," he said. "I can manage with my old ones." Something broke inside Shade that day. When Deli went to sleep she stared at him for hours. He was young, healthy, fresh. Everything the spirits wanted. Tears rolled down her face as she made her decision. Better one life than losing everything, she told herself. Better her son than a stranger's child. On a rainy Tuesday night, Shade mixed sleeping medicine into Deli's dinner. As he drifted off, she told him stories about his father who had died before he was born. She held him close, singing softly until his breathing became deep and even. Then she took out the sharp knife Baba Osen had given her. The rain got heavier, drowning out all sounds. Lightning flashed as Shade worked, her tears mixing with the blood. By morning, a new pot of stew bubbled on her fire. When customers asked about Deli, she said he had gone to live with relatives in the village. The lie tasted like ashes in her mouth. The effect was immediate. Her food became more popular than ever. People said they'd never tasted anything like it. Money flowed in faster than before. Shade bought a car, started building a house. But each night she heard Deli's voice calling her. Each morning she found his school books exactly where he'd left them, though she'd packed them away. Her hair began turning white. She lost weight despite eating well. Sometimes while serving food she thought she saw Deli sitting at one of the tables, watching her with sad eyes. Customers complained about a child's crying coming from her kitchen, but when they checked, no one was there. A month after Deli disappeared, 2 police officers came to Shade's buka. They weren't her regular customers. They asked questions about Deli, showed her missing person posters. His teachers had reported his absence. Shade stuck to her story about the village relatives, but her hands shook as she served them food. One of the officers stared at his meat for a long time before eating. Later she overheard them talking outside. "Something's not right," one said. "Did you see her face when we mentioned the boy?" That night Shade went to Baba Osen begging for protection. He gave her a charm to wear but warned her, the spirits can only hide so much. The hauntings got worse. Shade would wake to find all her pots turned upside down, spilling their contents. The stew would sometimes turn to blood before her eyes, then back again when she blinked. Deli's school uniform appeared on her bedroom chair every morning, no matter how many times she burned it. Her new house stood empty. She was too afraid to leave the buka. She slept on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the tools of her terrible trade. One night she woke to find Deli sitting next to her. "Why, Mama?" he asked. When she reached for him, her hands passed through air, but the floor was wet with tears. Among her customers was an old man who came every day. He always ordered the same thing, meat stew with pounded yam. He ate slowly, methodically, staring at Shade the whole time. One day he called her over. "I know what you did," he whispered. "I can see him in the meat. I can taste his innocence." Shade ran to the kitchen and vomited. When she came back, the old man was gone. In his place was a small school bag, Deli's bag, which she'd thrown in the river months ago. Inside was a note, "Justice is coming." The old man never came back. Shade screamed and ran into the street. causing a scene that brought everyone running. That evening, health inspectors arrived. They had received anonymous complaints about her food. They took samples of everything, especially the meat stew. Shade knew she was running out of time. That night she went to Baba Osun again but found his house empty. The neighbors said he'd disappeared 3 days ago. The health inspector's report shocked everyone. The meat in Shade's stew contained human DNA. Police surrounded her buka. They found bones buried behind her kitchen, small bones that could only belong to a child. In her house, they discovered Deli's blood-stained clothes hidden in a wall. Shade tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Deli's spirit held her in place, his small hands now strong as iron. As the police led her away, every pot in her kitchen exploded, showering everyone with what looked like blood but vanished before touching the ground. In the police station, Shade broke down. He told them everything, about Baba Osun, the cemetery visits, and finally about Deli. The officers recording her statement had to stop several times to vomit. One of them had been her regular customer. He couldn't stop crying, remembering all the meals he'd eaten at her buka. News spread through the city like wildfire. Hundreds of people who had eaten at her buka crowded the hospitals, sick with horror rather than any physical ailment. Former customers gathered outside the police station demanding justice. Some claimed they'd seen Deli's face in their dreams, warning them about the meat. The newspapers called it the cannibal buka case. People couldn't believe what they'd been eating. Many of Shade's regular customers had to seek counseling. Some lost their jobs because they couldn't stop thinking about what they'd consumed. The area around her buka became known as a cursed place. Religious leaders organized cleansing ceremonies for those who had eaten there. Traditional healers were overwhelmed with people seeking spiritual cleaning. But nothing could erase the memory of what had happened. The entire city seemed to be under a dark cloud, as if Deli's spirit was sharing his pain with everyone who had unknowingly consumed his flesh. Police launched a massive search for Baba Osun. They found his house in Mushin had been a front. The real owner hadn't lived there for years. Other women came forward, telling stories about his promises and demands. Some had refused his terms and left. Those who had agreed were now missing. Traditional rulers and herbalists denied any knowledge of him. In her cell, Shade started to change. She would have long conversations with thin air, laughing and crying. Sometimes she spoke in Deli's voice, answering herself in her own. The prison guards reported strange happenings. Her food would turn to worms, water to blood. Her cell was always cold, even in the hottest weather. She was sentenced to death by the court. A week before her scheduled execution, the guards found Shade's cell empty. The doors were still locked, the windows barred. Security cameras showed her dissolving into shadows at midnight. The area where her buka had stood became cold. Plants wouldn't grow there. Birds fell dead if they flew over it. People said they could hear cooking sounds at night and smell meat stew, though the building had been demolished. Just when people thought it couldn't get worse, Baba Osun reappeared. He was seen walking into the ocean at Bar Beach, leading a procession of white-eyed figures, all his victims who had made deals with him over the years. Shade was among them, holding hands with a child-sized shadow. Fishermen said the water turned red that day. The fish they caught had human teeth. Some swore they heard a huge chorus of voices singing from beneath the waves, a song about hunger and payment and eternal debt. The story changed Lagos forever. People became suspicious of small restaurants. Meat stew disappeared from many menus. Parents warned children never to eat at unfamiliar places. Street food vendors had to work hard to prove their meat came from legitimate sources. But deeper changes happened too. People became more mindful of the price of success.
Thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of African folktales. If you enjoyed this story, let me know by leaving a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to African Stories by Ace and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next tale. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and remember, every story holds a lesson.